Barbara, Ronald, Excellencies, and friends, it is a long journey that brought me here from the origins that have been described. A few years ago, I was at a dinner at the American Embassy, which was attended also by the then Chancellor Kohl. And the ambassador said, "What would have happened to you," addressing me, "if you had survived in Germany?" Which was not the most elegant way of putting the question. And I said, I would probably be a teacher at the gymnasium in Nuremberg, which was the largest city next to the town in which I was born. And Chancellor Kohl said, "No, you would be an instructor in Munich." Because it would never have occurred to my parents or to me when we lived abroad that one day I would be Secretary of State of the country that gave us refuge. And it is that journey that showed at its beginning the disaster that can happen to societies when they take a wrong turn, and the disaster that can happen to the Jewish people under those conditions. And then to come to a country where one could cross the street with one's head erect, so that for us who have been refugees, as Arthur Schneier pointed out, America always was a magical country. And we, in all the debates that were going on in this society, we always knew that for the rest of the world, the fate of America was essential for the future of freedom. So now you have done me the great honor of bestowing this award on me at a moment of enormous upheaval in the world. A period in which many of the institutions with which we've been familiar are under attack, and in which the Jewish people have again become, in some countries, the object of severe attacks, and also at a moment in which the Middle East finds itself in an upheaval in every respect. There are at least 3 revolutions going on simultaneously in that area. There's the revolution against governing authorities. And that defines the lack of satisfaction of big parts of the population with their economic well-being and with their right to participate in government. But at the same time, there are religious dimensions that have two aspects. One aspect that attempts to base the existing political institutions entirely on the most radical versions of the Islamic religion. And another aspect in which different aspects of that religion are in conflict with each other and are attempting to bring about a universal rule of their particular orientation. Then a third upheaval is one against the states, the borders of the states that were created in most cases artificially in 1920 at the end of the Second World War. So that some upheavals that start as upheavals against government then reach across frontiers and collapses some of the states that have formed up to now the international system. And on top of all of this, the various states that survive group themselves according to some or all of these divisions. So we see the phenomenon that Israel and Egypt and Saudi Arabia are pursuing parallel policies on many aspects, driven by a common fear of the rise of Iran. And so every country finds itself before a series of choices. For our country, for the United States, it has to make up its mind whether its primary objective is the domestic evolution of the various countries, and to what extent it can influence that evolution, and what price it is willing to pay for it. It also has to consider how it should react, or if to react to the manifestations of these revolutions as they go across national borders. And it has to come to some conclusion about how to balance the various positions and what it will defend, even if it has to do so unilaterally. These are the dilemmas that have already led to intense debates in this country, and it will lead to further debates, even more intense, in the months ahead. And then there is Israel. It is a state that has tried to live by the principles of the international system of non-aggression, peaceful coexistence, and recognition. It is in the unique position that for every other country, the recognition of its existence is taken for granted as the basis of diplomacy. Israel is asked to pay an admission price before it is recognized and participates in the international system. So, in the years ahead, there are a number of principles that the United States has to keep in mind. What it will defend or seek to achieve, even if it has to do so alone. What it has to achieve only together with allies. And finally, what is beyond its capacity. So it has been a fundamental principle of American foreign policy, heretofore pursued by every president, that the survival of Israel and the maintenance of its capacity to build a future is one of those principles that we will pursue, even if we have to do so alone. But in the years ahead, various groupings are going to be forming in the Middle East as countries are emerging into a new definition of themselves. And the United States has to learn how to position itself in a manner that most guarantees the future of Israel and the security of the region. Now, I have had personally the opportunity to participate in many of these negotiations. And it is not always easy to reconcile the American and the regional and even the Israeli point of view. A country that has its borders challenged throughout its history, that at its widest point is only 50 miles wide, does not have the same margin for negotiations that is imagined by a country of continental scope and global responsibilities. So one has to distinguish between two sets of issues. One set of issues is what makes coexistence between Israel and its neighbors more feasible and more helpful. And the second set of issues is what will lead to a permanent settlement. In my opinion, until the fundamental issues that I have described here move towards some resolution, it is very difficult to talk of an overall settlement. But it is possible to talk of measures that make the existence within Palestine of the Jewish and Arab populations more constructive. In my opinion, that is what the major effort of these negotiations should be. And the overall solutions will have to be discussed within the context of a solution of the various upheavals and the settling down of these upheavals that I've described. So we all have to think about what we mean by peace. What do we mean by balancing the strengths of states? What can we affect, and what must be left to the future? America must be a central player and a decisive element in many respects in many of these issues. And Israel will make its contribution by the understanding it shows for the psychological and historical problems of the people with which it lives in the same territory. But this cannot be accomplished in a final manner, in a single negotiation. And so I would put before you that we are seeing a world in turmoil. It is crucial for the United States to develop a conception of the future that we can sustain over a long period of time. And as part of that conception must be a realization that Israel has been a representative of the principles in which America believes, that it is the one country on whose geopolitical support America can always count, and that its future is of the decisive importance. And we should keep that especially in mind. At a moment when nuclear weapons may become more and more a feasible option for some of the Middle East countries. An event that would totally transform the situation, and which we are obliged to attempt to resist, to the greatest extent possible. So thank you for inviting me to this award. I've taken the liberty of putting before you matters that deeply preoccupy me. And they are matters which will determine the future of democracy and the future of the prospects of peace. I was a close friend of Yitzhak Rabin. And when he was ambassador in Washington, I always thought that he was a terrible speaker who was mumbling all the time. But then, after the Oslo Agreement, he made a number of speeches of almost biblical eloquence. He found his tongue on this issue, describing his experiences as a soldier and on the road to Jerusalem. Now we face a similar challenge. In America, we have come to think that peace is something that can be contracted in a single effort and then will be permanent. The fact is that we are engaged now in a process without end, but a process that needs our convictions and our commitments, and in which the friendship between Israel and the United States is a central element. Thank you very much for this opportunity.